You're listening to Faithful Friends, our new interfaith podcast where a rabbi and a Catholic deacon sit down to talk about life, faith, and the places where our stories intersect.
We're not here to debate. We're here to explore, to ask questions, maybe even laugh a little along the way. Hey everyone, I'm Anthony Cullen, Catholic deacon in training, theology nerd, and proud Jersey guy.
And I'm Rabbi Chaim Edelstein, lover of Torah, tradition, and a good cup of coffee. How's your summer going?
Summer's going well. We just finished up a couple of weeks of our summer religious education, and all the kids can come for a condensed religion program instead of going weekly at our parish. So they come for a week, like 8:30 to 2ish or so every day, and we kind of do like a deep dive and get an entire year's worth of stuff done in 5 days.
So like a summer camp kind of?
Kind of. It's more like summer intensive, academic, churchy stuff. We do some prayer services. We introduce them to different things.
It sounds like yeshiva program. If you're familiar with the yeshiva model?
I don't think so.
Yeshiva, it comes from a word that means to sit. Okay. And it's like sitting and studying. Some of the schools, you get into Lakewood or you go up to Brooklyn, they'll be called like a yeshiva school kind of a thing. They're, I guess, more like the Catholic school model, but heavier on the religious studies. But you also get programs that run summertime, intense. We're going to do all day. We're going to really dig into some stuff and try to get a lot into a little bit of time. So
yeah, it's certainly a lot. And then, every Monday it resets itself with a new group of kids. And it was definitely like playing whack-a-mole. Like we solved the problems of week 1, week 2, something else completely different came up. And it's like,
wow.
But yeah, a lot of fun. The kids had a lot of good questions for us, especially the older ones. I do this during the school year as well. I'll keep like a basket at the front of the room. And so our incoming 7th graders, they have somewhat more intense questions about different feelings and things coming in. So they're able to write them down, and we were able to address them. And they really appreciated that instead of just being told, don't question your faith. It's like, no, I want you to question things. So let's go into more of a deep dive. And one of my friends from Deacon class, one of the many Chris's that I know, was able to come by and kind of answer some of those questions for us as well, in kind of like a gentle way. Kind of ease them into more adult topics of Catholicism and the faith.
Speaking kind of gently easing people into things, that leads pretty well, I think, into our topic for today.
It does,
of Rebuke.
The views on Faithful Friends podcast are our own and don't represent officially any religious institution. We're here to share a thoughtful conversation and not to give any sort of legal, medical, or theological advice. And we'll hope you join us in the spirit of friendship and curiosity.
Our topic today, with the topic of rebuke, I think it's the first time that we're really getting into some of the meat, so to speak, of the legal side of our traditions. That we'll be kind of doing a bit of a dive into the halachic, the Jewish legal understandings here, as well as I know you're going to bring some of the Catechism, which I'm interested to learn more about. The topic today really came from a question about correcting behavior, that they said, something happened, someone, kind of corrected them on something, and they weren't really sure how they felt about it. Maybe it wasn't the right time for someone to do that. Maybe it wasn't done the right way, and had asked me, is there a right way to rebuke someone or to correct them on a behavior or perhaps even an idea, as we explore rebuke as a mitzvah, a commandment, and a responsibility perhaps, and maybe also as an act of righteousness. And we have to be careful that we're not being self-righteous as well. So that's the question for today. Should we correct people? Is there a right way to do it? Should we ever refrain from correcting people? And what do our traditions have to say about it? So let's hear some of our sources for today.
Researching this topic, Rabbi, you have over 1,000 different sources. We are not covering all of them today by any means. But if you would like to, please send us a question, and we certainly will answer it on future shows. As we were starting to talk about this, I was able to give a reflection at Mass the day after, and it came from Matthew's Gospel, and it really kind of struck me. So Jesus was going through a field, just to kind of give you the backstory. This is Matthew chapter 12, the beginning of it. And him and his friends were hungry, and it was the Sabbath, and they're going around and they're picking heads of grain to eat them. And some of the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees, were saying to them, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. And as they go through, he says that, have you not read what David did when him and his companions were hungry? They went to the house of God and they ate the bread of offering. And neither he nor his companions, but only the priests could lawfully eat. And as they go through it, they realize there's some sort of necessity, as well as keeping with the law, to go with the spirit of things as well. It's all about the rebuke and Jesus' answer to the whole thing. And as we were continuing to do this research, the Catechism of the Catholic Church came to mind. And just to give everyone a background, since this is the first time I believe we're introducing it here, the Catechism is not only a list of all of our beliefs, but it's the explanation of it. It's the why behind the whole thing. So it's not just for like theologians or for clergy, but it's something that should be seen as a treasure for all of us if we need to see some clarity and like truth to our faith. It gives us the moral questions, the answers behind it. It's listed out. It's publicly available on the Vatican website. There's so much commentary on it, even though it's not terribly old.
Now, is that considered binding law, or is it more ethical instruction?
Right. So there's civil law and there's Catholic law, right? My classic example is, leaving here, can I run a red light? And the answer is no. I'll get pulled over by local police. I'll get a ticket. I am clearly doing something wrong. The Catholic Church has what's called canon law, which we're not going to get into today. As we said in the disclaimer, let's not go too deep into it, to the whole thing. But there's canon lawyers and everything, and that's how we uphold the traditions of the church on a very legal basis. The Catechism is a way of explaining the faith. Yes, our rules and regulations are in there, but this is the explaining of why, and to educate people.
Okay.
So right now we have Pope Leo. Before that was Francis. Previous was Benedict. And Benedict, before he was Benedict, was Cardinal Ratzinger in the 80s, was challenged by Pope John Paul II to put together this catechism, a more up-to-date one. And by the early 90s, it came out, and that became also the focus of Benedict's pontificate when he was Pope, of how to educate everyone in a meaningful way with a common source. We've had catechisms over the years from Trent, post-Reformation, so this is mid-1500s. It's gotten revised a number of times, but this is the more modern version that we have, and it came out in the early 90s, and that's what a lot of it is based off of. There's even a youth version that came out, I want to say 2011, 2012-ish, right at the end of Benedict's pontificate before he retired and abdicated, and Francis took over. That's really good. It really addresses things on more of a teenage level, on a little bit of an easier language. But so anyway, in the Catechism, it does bring up rebuking and kind of correcting people. And one of the big ones, and I was going to touch on the first one just for brevity's sake, paragraph 1829, and it talks about the fruit of charity and joy and peace and mercy. Charity demands benevolence and fraternal correction. So this fosters reciprocity, and it's generous, and it's also friendship and communion of each other. So we're supposed to do this not only as a legally binding thing and tell people they're absolutely wrong, but correct them to bring them back into the fold in a generous way. And, not to be arrogant about it, and not to be nasty. It's not like we're correcting somebody and beating them over the head that they did something wrong. It's how do we lead by example and bring people back into the fold. And then I think that really summarizes even the rest of them that we might go into later on in the episode.
Yeah, I see you have a whole list of a number of these different elements. I appreciate that introduction and summary there, as I'm unfamiliar with much of that you're bringing. Using some of our more modern Jewish textual search engines that we have, it was well over 1,000 different sources when I was trying to find this. So I tried to find just a few that I felt gave a good handle of this without, as you said, getting too into the weeds about it. So the first one for us it comes in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 17. It says, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall certainly rebuke your friend, but you shall not bear a sin on his account." And that verse creates this enormous library of commentators. In Hebrew, of course, the verb here is hochiach, and we more often use the term tochacha, which comes from that same root. And giving tochacha is to rebuke someone this way, sort of that very specific kind of correction, usually over the performance of a mitzvah. The second one that I thought I would bring is from the Talmud, Yevamot, page 65, folio B. It says, "Rabbi Eliah said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will be heeded, so is it a mitzvah for a person not to say that which will not be heeded, meaning that one should not rebuke those who will be unreceptive to his message. Rabbi Abba says it is obligatory for him to refrain from speaking in that case. As it is stated, do not reprove a scorner lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. So we're getting now that kind of more guidance about when, who and when, right? Someone you know is not going to listen to you. Just don't even engage, apparently. I'm going to give a short example here from the halachic literature now that I think will set us up maybe for some case study discussion from the Mishnah Torah, which is the first pure codification of Jewish law. It's about the 12th century. And this is from the Laws of Human Dispositions, chapter 6. And it says, "It is a mitzvah for a person who sees that his fellow Jew has sinned or is following an improper path to attempt to correct his behavior and to inform him that he is causing himself a loss by his evil deeds. As the Torah says, you shall surely admonish your colleague. A person who rebukes a colleague, whether because of a wrong committed against him or because of a matter between his colleague and God, should rebuke him privately. He should speak to him patiently and gently, informing him that he is only making these statements for his colleague's own welfare to allow him to merit the life of the world to come. If he accepts the rebuke, it is good. If not, he should rebuke him a second and third time. Indeed, one is obligated to rebuke a colleague who does wrong until the latter strikes him and says, 'I will not listen.' Whoever has the possibility of rebuking sinners and fails to do so is considered responsible for that sin, for he had the opportunity to rebuke the sinners." Oh, what do you think? I noticed a nice crossover between the Catechism text you shared and the middle of this paragraph as well.
First thing I want to bring up is the timestamp of when this was written, the 12th century. And this is something we kind of discovered recently, that the Code of Canon Law that I mentioned was also developed around that same time initially. So something to kind of look into in the future. It's like, what happened in the world exactly that all of our laws started to get codified at that point?
Yeah.
We'll go down a history rabbit hole at a different time. But as we're talking about this, one thing that comes to mind on our end is we talk about sin, being like excluded from the fold. We're doing something to bring us away from God, for whatever the reason. We talk about sin of omission and commission, of doing an action or not doing an action also being a sin. And that's what this kind of boils down to for me. I do like that it's a lot more text and a lot more case study, for argument's sake, of giving examples that you have, that at least it's not common for us to have things like that. So this is good to keep reading up on it and kind of understanding a little more of the background of why we do things.
I like that they both have this sense that this type of correction should be done gently.
Right, and privately, I think was one of the words.
Yeah, this is chapter 6, this is Halacha 7. In the next one, he goes on to say, there might be occasions where you might do it in public, but initially it says you should be very careful not to embarrass the person. That if you speak harshly and they become embarrassed, then that's not the right way to go about it. And he also says that in regards to matters between one man and another, we have to be careful with this public-private type of a thing, that if someone was to be shamed in public, then he may be subjected to abuse, scorn, and curses until he repents, as was the practice of the prophets of Israel. So that depending on what it is, he's reading back, look at the prophets. They went out on the street corners and they called people out on what they were doing. That was a very particular case. And that, for the most part, we're not dealing with that.
Right. That was the whole city of Nineveh was doing something wrong. And it's like, all right, Jonah, go out there and do it. Talking about the prophets, most of them had a hard time dealing with that prior.
Yeah.
They struggled with it because they knew they would be publicly rebuking people. They ran, and God kept calling them back.
I also think we have to consider, am I the same stature as Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah the prophet? Do I think that Hashem is speaking directly to me to go and tell someone to correct their ways? I mean, if I did believe that, then maybe that's right to behave that way. But I think most of us hopefully acknowledge that we're not the great prophets of Israel, and that when we feel the need to correct someone, that we should do it privately, gently, and only if we think that they will appreciate it. In the Proverbs, where it says, "Do not reprove a scorner lest he hate you, reprove a wise man and he will love you." In the Talmud, the rabbis teach that it's an obligation not to say something if you think the person is not going to listen to you. And that's a lot of negatives. But if they are not going to listen to you, it's almost prohibited for you to say something to them, because now they're just going to be upset with you, and nothing's going to come out of it.
A sense of maturity as well, is realizing that if somebody's going around like a child and they're screaming, they don't want to hear you, you got to let them calm down first. And we all need to have a civil conversation, much like this podcast. We say it that we're going to have a respectful conversation. We're not here to have an active debate.
And we're not doing a psak halacha either. We're not telling people exactly how to interpret these things.
Exactly.
Our interpretations, but an example I can bring, that there's a possibility of public correction. Okay, so every week we read from the Torah scroll. And it's difficult because the vowels are not there. You have to kind of almost half memorize what it is you're reading. The musical notation of how to chant it is not there, so you have to kind of memorize how to do that. And people make mistakes. And the rules that we follow, at least here that we follow, are not to correct someone if it doesn't change the meaning of the word. So sometimes you have a word, if it's vayomer, okay, which means "and he said." It appears hundreds of times in the Torah. Well, that's a va at the beginning. If someone said ve, it doesn't really change the meaning of the word that much, right? So don't correct them on that. That's a minor error. The other one would be at the end of a verse where the chanting should indicate that was the end of a verse. You should probably correct them on that because that's the end of a verse. But if in the middle of a verse they did the wrong trope, they did the wrong musical notation, it's not who cares, but it's like, who's going to correct that, right?
No,
so you have to prioritize things.
You don't stop the service and be like, you did it wrong there, or is that a private thing afterwards?
So typically there are people who are standing next to, also following along in a book that has all of these things. And if someone really mispronounces a word or they really missed something, you just quietly say it the correct way, and then they repeat it.
Okay.
That's the kind of gentle correction. You don't stop, you did it wrong. Diber and davar, but davar means either a word or a thing, and diber means speaking to someone. It's a serious changing of the word, right?
Sure.
So if they say davar, you go diber, and they go diber, and then they keep going.
Okay.
And leading different prayers or services, someone will come to me and say, "Rabbi, only because I know you really care about this, but you mispronounced this word. You need to take a look at it." And I'll go take a look at it and go, "Oh, wow, yeah, I did." Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. But you wouldn't want someone yelling from the back of the room.
Sure.
"It's such and such." So again, it's that gentle kind of correction.
Right. I was having a conversation with a couple of friends at dinner the other day, and somehow this came up with clergy changing the words of certain things and the validity of a sacrament as a result. So in the Catholic Church, in that canon law I was referring to, it is very specific on certain things. And there's some things that if you mispronounce, okay. If there's other things you saw change in the words, some things never happen as a result. And a couple of years ago, there was a priest, Midwest somewhere, I'm not going to go into details, it's super easy to Google him though, but he found a video of his baptism, and in the Gospels it says, and what we say is, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit." Roman Catholics do it. Many other churches do it. We have a list of churches that do this. So if somebody's baptized as whatever Christian church, we look at the list. Oh, you can certainly come here. We don't need to baptize you because it's a one and done thing. That's our first sacrament with water coming into the church. So this priest finds the video of his baptism, and the clergy member that was doing it said, "We baptized you." Well, that's not valid. And there was all this debate, and the Vatican got involved in all this stuff, and he had to redo all of his sacraments.
All of them.
Nothing counted, including what he did.
He wasn't even a priest.
He was not even a Catholic.
Oh. So any wedding or funeral or anything that he had officiated at?
This is where canon law gets funky with it. Weddings, it's the couple as the ministers of the sacrament. The church is there as a witness. So
was he a valid witness?
Yes.
Interesting. There were other people there also.
There were other people there, but technically that's fine. And any baptism he did is fine because in an emergency, anybody can baptize.
Okay.
So, Rabbi, in an event that you were in the hospital and there was a child very sick after being born, you could baptize because your intention is correct and you say the right words, you use real water. Don't use a cup of coffee, even though I know you always have one in your hand. But as long as you had water and it said, child's name, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's done. It's valid. That gets recorded in the local parish.
Interesting.
So that was fine. It was his other sacraments that were an issue and his personal ones that were never done. So he had to get baptized, receive his first communion, get confirmed, and get ordained as a deacon and as a priest. Not again, because the first time never happened.
Could they fast track that a little bit because of his education?
Yes. Yeah, no, it happened within a couple of weeks.
Wow.
But it was a major thing. It was because the words weren't said correctly because some guy who was a member of the clergy took it upon himself to change what the church does. And you can't do that.
So it goes to speak about how this kind of correcting could be really quite serious.
Right. And that's so far from private because this made international news. Once the Vatican gets involved, you know something bad happened. The diocese where the bishop lives actually had a website made just for this. And there was an inquiry form, people questioning things because they had to field so many of them.
At a traditional style Jewish wedding, the groom has to say a phrase to the bride. If he didn't say it the right way, or if he really butchered the pronunciation or missed a word or something like that, people might not have considered them married. In a case where we're talking about making a serious change to someone's life based on words, for the fun of it, hypothetically, you were at a baptism, not officiating, and someone said one of these things incorrectly. Are you obligated to say, hold up, stop the show, you need to say it again, and you need to get it right? Or do you let it go and then afterwards go to the family and say, hey, we need to do it again. Can we do a little private room and let's just do it again?
The latter is correct. Yeah. It's an afterwards thing. We want to make sure we get it right. There was a story I heard recently after I think it was a priesthood ordination. There's a lot of clergy there. And when you have a lot of clergy, I'm sure the same thing on your end. You know, you have 40 clergy, you get 50 different opinions. And a lot of them were canon lawyers, and there was an issue with something that happened in the rite itself, and if the ordination was even valid after the event took place. And there was back and forth, and the bishop had to squash something at the end. But it does happen, but you wouldn't correct it during the event itself.
So I think this goes to the seriousness that we take the gentle nature of correction and wanting to avoid embarrassing people.
Correct. Especially your own bishop. I will embarrass mine, though, at today, just because today's the anniversary of his ordination as a bishop 15 years ago. We actually had a special mass this morning. There's special propers of the mass, so we can celebrate it for him in Thanksgiving of his ordination.
I would say probably the same thing. Like something happened, you go, I don't really know if that counted. I would be more likely to say, just let it go. And then afterwards, we're going to say, you know what, actually, we need to do that again to correct this.
Right. But sometimes we're certainly obligated to say something with abuses in the terms of wrong things happening during our liturgies. And people do complain up to the bishop's office. I could think of examples where I've heard of abuses in the 70s and 80s where people were using different elements for Mass. We have to use real bread made just from flour and water with no yeast, and wine made from grapes. That's it. Some people took it upon themselves to use different types of bread. Instead of using wine, using something else. That's an absolute liturgical abuse, and that's where you get into the weeds a little bit of a valid sacrament, and then there's illicit. You did something a little wrong, okay, it's still a valid thing, but if it's an invalid sacrament because now you're changing the form and the matter of what was supposed to be happening, well, now it never really happened. A priest years ago told me, when it comes to correcting people, think about it, is lightning going to strike or not? If lightning's not going to strike, we say something privately. If it is and the sacrament's not going to be valid, we need to actually have a conversation about this, immediately. It's a balance, right?
Yeah.
With clergy especially, because the more you know, the more this really applies to you. And with us, that certainly comes up.
Yeah, I have a past teacher who's the rabbi at a synagogue that a lot of rabbis go to.
Okay.
upstate New Jersey, if we can call it that. And a lot of the members in that synagogue are professors at the seminary. And he was teaching us life cycle events. And you go, that's great. It's like a rabbi's rabbi. But I asked him one day, I said, how is it being the rabbi when there's like 50 rabbis in the congregation every week? This is paraphrasing. It's been a number of years. He said, look, if those guys wanted my job, they would have it. So yeah, sometimes I get corrected. If I say a date or something, the professor emeritus of Jewish history might come up and correct me on it afterwards. But that's okay because I need to know those things, and he does know them. So I appreciate those that way. But I think it goes back to the wise person will appreciate that correction because we want to do it right and want to be accurate with what we're doing. So we have to also use some wisdom when we're working with other people. I think you have an interesting perspective working with youth so much. And I know, and this is an area where in education, we have an opportunity to make corrections before they're needed. How do you approach this type of correction with youth in the school and teaching, whether it's a custom or law, that blurry line? How do you handle this type of correction with youth and teaching them how to do it to each other?
So just putting my thoughts together, because I know a couple of them listen to this, or at least tell me they do. So when we teach them, we're certainly put on a different level, and we need to live our faith. And we can't just say, not monkey see, monkey do. If I'm doing something wrong, like, don't do it as I do, kind of thing. I need to be put there at a different level as well. They see me, they see my family there on a Sunday and other days of the year. And we need to be there at that church so they can see us there and see us in the community. And it does go back to the family. And a lot of them, their families aren't practicing. They go to Catholic school, they go to a summer religious ed. But we need to break down those barriers as well, because they might have had a poor education where they went when they were kids. Most people have 8th grade Catholic education, and then they're gone. So how do we re-engage them? It's a tough one, but leading by example is where I try to be all times. A couple of years ago when I started teaching, one of the 8th graders asked to follow me on Instagram, which started my own Instagram account just for the school, and that's primarily faith-based stuff. I do fun things as well. I was at a concert last night. I posted about it. I'm not only living in church. That's not me at all. We have to have a balance between prayer and work, as St. Benedict says, as his motto. But even the kids, when they say, Mom or Dad, they don't come to church on Sunday, we explain to them that you aren't freely doing that then. That's not a transgression. That's not a sin against you because you can't freely do that. And that's a major part about the criteria we have against those sins. When they do start questioning, well, I can't go, or I have sports, my answer is we have 5 masses on a Sunday over 2 days.
Yeah. If you want to come, you'll find a time to.
Right, exactly. You just got to prioritize what's there. There are churches everywhere. Catholic literally means universal. You can go to Mass in Rome, you can go to Mass in Germany, in Brooklyn, here in Homedale. It doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. Always look at the website of whatever church you're with. There's a website called masstimes.org. There's always a way. We do ask you to try, do something at that point. But if you can't, you're still a kid. You can't walk to church. You can't drive at this point. That obligation certainly isn't fully on you. Also, ask your parents at that point. Maybe we could go to church, go to breakfast afterwards, do something as a family together. The domestic church is a huge part of our faith that people seem to forget. It's not just an hour a week on Sunday. There's 6.5 other days out there that you should be using your faith at some level.
So that term you used was domestic church.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
The church at home.
Religious life
Correct.
in the home, the way the family is living.
Right.
We struggle with that as well. When people see their Judaism playing out only on Saturday, we lose a lot of opportunities. And it's hard to keep up with some of these things. If you don't regularly do some of these rituals, then when you do come and do it as part of a community, you're more likely to make a mistake. And you're more likely to have some goodness of their heart kind of people will want to correct you on it. And that's where we see sometimes people actually making mistakes of it would have been better if they didn't say anything, but they want to. I'm not always sure what the drive is. Make people feel like they're a part of the community by doing it the quote right way, and actually they kind of alienate them by making them feel like they don't know what they're doing.
You know, a lot of people don't go to church. They say, oh yeah, I was Catholic until confirmation in 8th grade, and then I kind of left. And it's one thing as a simple social interaction. You can always say you're always welcome back. With family, you're going to see them again. And you kind of have to be a little bit gentle on things like that.
Can I tell you a joke? It's
Sure.
a Jewish Catholic joke. It's kind of perfect. There's a new priest comes into town, and he notices there are mice in the parish. And so he goes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, when I came over to visit, I noticed there's not a mouse in sight. And I have a terrible infestation of mice over in the parish. How do you get rid of them? And the rabbi says, well, whenever we have a mouse, I make him a little tiny yarmulke and a little tiny tallis, a little prayer shawl. I give him a bar mitzvah, never see him again.
That's good. That's good. I like that.
I think every rabbi I know, we only laugh because it's partly true. It's so hard to keep youth involved. And I think part of it is as they start coming into their own, we have to be careful with how we correct some of these things too. In other places in the Talmud, there's a lot of discussion about this idea that if you didn't correct someone or rebuke them, whatever sin they committed kind of becomes yours. It's as if you did it. But what if they don't listen to you? And that also is tied into an idea we have about transgressions being knowingly or wittingly and unwittingly or unknowingly, which we call shogeg and mezid. If you didn't know that what you did was a transgression, your accountability for it is different than if you knew full well that this is not permitted and you did it anyways.
Absolutely.
Right?
Okay,
So a classic example, someone is planting a tree on Shabbat. There are two ways that they might be unknowingly committing that transgression. One could be they didn't realize it was Shabbat. They think it's Sunday. Whatever, it's fine to do whatever you want to do on a Sunday. Or they might know it's Shabbat and they might not know that it's not permitted to plant a tree on Shabbat. They may know what day it is and not know that that is prohibited. They might know it's prohibited but not know what day it is. And now you're walking past them. If you correct them, hopefully gently and privately, and say, good Shabbos, I see you're planting this tree. I was just curious if you're aware that it's Shabbat and that this is a prohibited labor. If they say, oh, no, I didn't know that, and they stop, good for everyone, right? If they were to say, yes, I know, and I'm going to do it anyways, you're still obligated to tell them 2 more times that this is a prohibited action to make sure that they really understand that by doing it, you will become liable for transgressing the mitzvah in a mazid way, in a way that is knowing full well. This is where the Rambam is saying, keep doing it until they hit you. Even they say, go away, I'm not going to listen to you. Because then you have absolved yourself of the obligation you have towards them. There's the person who's doing something, and then there's the person who is trying to correct them, and how we have this relationship happening. If you don't know the person, is it a different kind of obligation? If it's a close family member, is it a different kind of obligation?
I guess my immediate follow-up to that, though, is there's so many different congregations in Judaism, and you might follow things slightly differently. So if there's somebody who's wearing more formal clothing and you obviously know they're a different form of Judaism than you, are you going to correct them for doing something too much or too little compared to what you do here?
That's why I think knowing the person, I think, makes a change. If I really didn't know someone at all, then I feel like I don't know if they're going to be receptive to it. And we've already seen clear teaching that if you think the person's not going to be receptive to it, just don't engage.
Sure.
Right? A number of years ago when I was living in Israel, it was during Sukkot, and I had my lulav, the palm branch that we use during the holiday, and a friend of mine who was from a more progressive, liberal tradition of Judaism didn't have one and had asked kind of a group chat, hey, does anybody have a lulav for the last day? I would like to be able to do the mitzvah. And I said, yeah, you can use mine. I'll borrow my roommate's for the last day, so I don't mind to bring you mine. We were going to have Shabbos dinner Friday night with this friend of mine. So a roommate that I had and I are walking from our apartment to this friend's apartment, and we had to go through a neighborhood that was a little more ultra-Orthodox. So I was carrying this lulav because I'm going to a dinner. But it was very close to sunset. In fact, there's a siren that goes off in Jerusalem to let you know that it's sunset. Had already gone off, and we're getting very close to it being Shabbos. And so we're walking down the street, and this guy, with the shtreimel, the big fur hat and the whole thing, he sees me, and he looks, and he goes, Muksa, which means you shouldn't touch that on Shabbat. And I kind of stopped, and I looked at him, and I was like, I think I'm going to walk the other direction right now. But instead, he runs, full speed, runs across the street, comes over to me and starts talking to me, sort of a Yiddishy Hebrew. My Hebrew was okay, but not great. So he kind of switched to English a little bit. And he's kind of like, don't you know you can't touch it on Shabbos? Da, da, da. And I was like, yeah, but I'm just taking it to a friend's house,
it's the
whatever.
intention behind it, too.
And he goes, no, you can't touch it here. Put it over here. He goes, there's a yeshiva right here. Put it here, come back after Shabbos and get it. And I was like, these are expensive. And I had promised a friend of mine. But this guy's yelling in the middle of the street, like, what am I going to do, right? So very kind of reluctantly, I left it at this yeshiva, and I went to a friend's house, and I told him the whole story. And he goes, at least you got a good story out of it. I said, look, after Shabbos, I'll come back up here, and I'll see if I can get it, whatever. I went up, and I asked about it. Hey, does anybody know where this lulav was, whatever? No one knows. So I lost the lulav. But I guess I got a good story out of it. But to me, that was like absolutely the wrong approach for this. And now I know better that if you happen to find yourself and it's Shabbos and you're holding something that's muksa, you're allowed to carry it to its proper place and then put it away. You don't have to drop it in the street because all of a sudden it's Shabbos and you're carrying this thing. I didn't really know some of those nuances at the time. So this older, more Orthodox kind of man sort of took advantage of me in that way.
Now, isn't there the perimeter?
The Eruv. Yeah, we were inside of an Eruv, so that really didn't make a difference.
Okay.
It was something you're not supposed to touch on Shabbat.
Just specifically with the item. Okay.
Yeah. But it was so public that I was very embarrassed by it.
That's not necessary.
Very embarrassed. I was very caught off guard. And I know if the friend who was with me listens to this, he'll laugh, remembering that.
So on the Catholic side, we have 3 conditions for something to be a sin. You have to know it's wrong. So if you don't know, that already eliminates that part. It needs to actually be something that's wrong. You can't just assume that it is. We have our rules and regulations and our customs, but if it isn't one of them, it doesn't affect us. I could feel guilty I'd eat kosher today. Well, the kosher has nothing to do with my religion, so that's not my dietary restriction. It can't be a sin against me, kind of things like that. But the final part is you need to be able to do it freely. For whatever reason, and I'm sure this is on both ends, when we talk about sin with kids, they always bring up murder. I don't know why that's like the one thing they always go to. And it's like, all right, we're going like real far on this one. But if somebody is forcing you to kill somebody else, is that full sin greatly on you? Well, it really depends on the situation as well. You don't have that free will. And that goes into like psychological illness as well, because you don't have the free will anymore. You don't have that mental capacity. That is something that always kind of comes in. And, as we were talking about little stories, I can remember back in high school, there was a priest with us who was on faculty. And during Lent, and as we talked about last episode about fasting and the certain dietary things, Catholics can't have meat on Fridays. One of my friends had a turkey sandwich and freaked out like halfway through it because Father Morano was going to come around and yell at him because he was known to be very orthodox in the way of his teaching and everything. And Father Morano was very gentle with it. And he's like, eat the sandwich. It'd be more of an issue if you wasted the food today. And it's like, that's such a pastoral, well-mannered way of putting it. And he told the kid, do something different today, some other sort of sacrifice, because you couldn't follow the meat rule. But that, you know what? It's not the end of the world. Just do something else. And it's like, that makes complete sense. Because he didn't do it freely. Maybe mom, dad, whoever made a sandwich in the morning completely forgot it was a Friday. They gave it to him. Just go with it at that point. And that's happened to me recently this year with a teacher doing that on a Friday during Lent. I'm not going to correct them publicly. Maybe I would have said something afterwards, but they realized it when, I had a salad with shrimp in it or whatever it was. And they're like, oh, wait a second, today's Friday. Yeah, I was going to mention something. It was more of an issue for me to tell you to throw out the food. Don't waste it. Eat it. And try to do something else today and bring yourself in line what we're trying to do.
Is that where confession comes in?
Correct. We have 2 different types of sin. Mortal sin is hitting those 3 categories. No, it's wrong. It is wrong. You did it freely. If you're missing one of those parts, You don't necessarily have to confess it to a priest to have your sins forgiven. You could, because from a psychological standpoint, it does feel good to kind of get that off your chest, whatever it is. But like I said, from the psychological point of view, something's habitual, it's an addiction, whatever, you certainly should talk about it. But your culpability is certainly going to be much less at that point, because you're not doing it freely. You know that you're tangled in whatever mess. Alcoholism is the easiest one to talk about with that. Somebody who's addicted to it, well, they can't stop. They know it's a disease at that point. But on the other hand, is it gluttonous behavior because you're overindulging in something? Yeah, we could go down lines, but we're certainly not going to point and ridicule somebody for doing their best and trying to get rid of that issue in their life.
So I guess to conclude for today, I think my takeaway is both our traditions have robust text on this issue, and that they both agree that if this is appropriate to correct someone, which it may or may not be depending on the situation, it has to be approached with kindness, with a gentle touch to avoid embarrassing the person as much as possible, but that we may also have some responsibility to correct people or keep people on the right path, so to speak.
You know, there's a line from scripture saying that the gate gets narrower the closer you get to heaven. I'm paraphrasing this, and it certainly is. The more you know, us as soon to be or as clergy, we're kind of held to a higher standard, and we do need to lead people in that right direction, and leading by example on both faiths by encouraging people to read the Catechism, read your source text as well, and to learn more about it. It certainly helps us in our everyday lives to be corrected and kind of follow the right path.
A great discussion today, and thanks everyone for listening and for your support. We want to thank our producer, Evan Feist, and we want to answer or respond to a question that we received that was, why does the Pope wear a yarmulke? Which I think we're going to end up doing an entire episode, most likely, I think, closer to Anthony's ordination, on religious vestments and religious garments of different types. Could be a very interesting topic there. So as always, please send in any questions you have or responses you may have to the episode. If there was something that resonated with you that we discussed today and you would like to respond to it, you can get us at our email at faithfulfriendscast@gmail.com. You can send us a voice memo on our Instagram, faithfulfriends_podcast.
We're on Facebook now. All of our stuff will be linked on the RSS webpage. So a couple of my students asked us to do a little sign-off, just a little shout-out to the two girls who sent it out today, without naming their names. But stay tuned, stay faithful, and stay subscribed.